So I think we're going to get started. I'm sorry, this is meant to be a roundtable, and I'm sorry this room is really not very conducive to roundtable-iness. So, yeah, with the tables, and by the time we got all the tables shoved aside, the
It's already free.
Waste a bunch of time.
Yeah. Okay. So this is, just in case anybody's in the wrong place, this is Solidarity Economy Towards a Pluralist, Socialist, Anti-Capitalist, Post-Capitalist Unity ? So the impetus for this workshop was actually one of the organizers got in touch and said, you know, the theme is solidarity. It would be good to have something on solidarity economy. And you know, it's really the question that's really been on my mind is why solidarity economy? Why not socialism? Is it the same as socialism? What's the overlap? What are the differences? Is there a reason to talk about solidarity economy instead of something else? So yeah, this roundtable is meant to kind of explore the what do we mean by these different kind of strands of one of these things? You know, socialist, anti-capitalist, post-capitalist. We have. I'm Emily Kawano. I'm the director of the Center for Popular Economics, as well as the coordinator of the Solidarity Economy Network. This is Maliha Safri. She is. So I'm going to introduce them. We all wear lots of hats. I think I'm just going to introduce people by the organization or the particular framework that they are representing. So Maliha Safri will be speaking about community economies. Jerome Scott will be speaking next. He's representing the League of Revolutionaries for New America. And then Carl Davidson will be speaking last, or really I should say facilitating last, because we hope it will be a short presentation and then a conversation. So he's representing committees of correspondence for democracy and socialism. So full disclosure, Carl is also on the board of the Solidarity Economy Network. And we actually have worked a fair amount with Maliha on some projects. So community economies and solidarity economy have been working together. And we worked together on the social forum. So happy family here.
And a long time ago.
And a long time ago.
Yes.
Going back, Elon, Economic Literacy Action Network. Going back, I don't know how many years.
Yeah.
More than I can even believe. So the structure of the workshop is we identified 3 questions. You probably have a better articulation of the questions than I do. The 3 questions, and each one, as I said, is meant to be facilitated by the 3 of us. We'll have a short bit of commentary or presentation from us, and then open it up. So the 3 questions are: the first one is, what is your analysis of the moment, right? This particular historical juncture, and who do you work with? So that's one question. Who's your base? The second question that Jerome will be leading that discussion is, what is your approach to social change or revolution or transformation or whatever that is, social change. The third question is, what are you trying to concretely achieve? So what are your very, very specific areas of work? So those are the 3. And so this is all in the context of sort of trying to understand solidarity economy is kind of the framing, right? How does this relate to solidarity economy? So before we start, I'm going to take the opportunity, just because of the framing of the network, just to define solidarity economy. So in the US, other parts of the world might define it slightly differently. In the US, we define it around principles. So we're trying to create a new economy for people and planet that's centered on the following principles of solidarity, cooperation, participatory democracy, sustainability, equity in all dimensions, so race, class, gender, etc., and pluralism. So by pluralism, we mean it's not a one-size-fits-all model. Therefore, we are not particularly saying we're for this kind of socialism or this kind of anarchism or this kind of whatever, right? We're saying here's a big tent, and we're trying to get us pulling together. We might not agree on every last thing, but it's a big tent, hopefully, where we can pull together and have those rich debates without necessarily saying this is the one model that we're choosing. So I just want to sort of preface it with that kind of a framework, and then I think we'll just move on to the first question. And you should just intro that. You're going to summarize.
Right. So before we all gathered here, we had a couple of longish conversations where we tried to flesh out some of the things that we think are important to draw out in an analysis of the moment, right? So I'm going to report on some of the themes that we could kind of agree on. And then one perhaps source of some disagreement, right? And it was an interesting disagreement, which is also why I'm going to bring it up. So in terms of our analysis, we could agree on you could say, one big statement, which is that this is not a problem that started last year or the year before, that we've been in a certain kind of long slump, right? And we could, each of us draw on certain things, perhaps in the 1970s, 1980s particularly. So in the 1970s, we could identify that there's this sort of big change in the U.S. economy, and we enter this long period of deindustrialization, lowering of wages, average wages, right? We see sort of a falling away of some of the attributes of a good job for an average person in the 1950s, 1940s, 1960s, but also let's bracket that too, because there were big areas of exclusion in even those periods of prosperity. We also know that there's been this long crisis in the sort of the public sector as well, right? So what we see in Wisconsin is that also didn't happen last month, right? That has been going on in the 1980s with Reagan, and so this is not, these are in some ways old battles too, you know, and we shouldn't overblow that they all began in 2008. So I think all of us could also see that this long period is, you could link it to a systemic crisis in capitalism, that these are not unrelated problems, lowering of the wages, lack of good jobs, environmental degradation, environmental pollution, a sort of, you know, falling away of the social services that we all can take advantage of, that we thought were our rights as citizens, right? The right to a public education, even through high school, is sort of being contested, it feels like, in some places.
As taxpayers, not as citizens.
Of course, yeah.
Taxpayers.
Yes, yeah, that as well, but as citizens and non-citizens and undocumented immigrants too. There's a lot of people, right? So I'll just report very quickly. I know on one thing that we couldn't all come up with one, like this is all, yeah, we all agree about this issue, and that is, okay, if this is a big crisis, we understand that even, you know, though this is a long period of crisis, something acute is going on too, right? Very recently, and it's in the air. People are talking about it. People are thinking about it in a way they hadn't been in just the last 5 or 10 years. So, some of us said this crisis is so big, there is no way it can recover. And others of us said, well, you know, we can't tell something about it. We can't tell that from right now. And that it's possible that there are ways that capitalism could recover. It's possible that the area of green technology could be a whole new dynamic sector in capitalism, enough to kind of create a sort of, you know, everybody's already talking about our recovery with double-digit unemployment. So it won't take it doesn't imagine that it would take very much to just imagine a recovery has happened through green capitalism, right? So there was that kind of disagreement that are we at a point, have we hit rock bottom and that's it? There's no way but for a really big change to occur? Or is it possible for us to recover in a way, perhaps not to the level of 2006, 2007, 2000, but in another kind of way, in a changed, permutated form, right? So that was one interesting conversation that we had, where we got to learn a lot from each other too. So very briefly now, I think we're going to take a little bit of time and identify the communities that we work with, our base, as Emily talked about, right? So who are you working with? Are you working with communities? Are you working with unions? Are you working at, what's your constituency? So I'll go very briefly first and then hand it over. So I work with a community in Asbury Park that's primarily composed of undocumented immigrants and second-generation Haitian teenagers and young men. But that's not the only community I work with. I also do a lot of work with worker cooperatives in the New York City area. They recently joined under the moniker of NIC-NOC, New York City Network of Worker Cooperatives. So there's about 30 you could say around 30 worker cooperatives that have started to meet monthly to try to figure out how do we sort of share resources, how do we cultivate more worker cooperatives in the future. That's our kind of goal there. And I also do work with lots of scholars and activists and practitioners that are engaged in economic literacy with the Center for Popular Economics and the U.S. Solidarity Economy Network. So shall we go this way then, in terms of answering?
Sure. Sure. So, yeah. Do I need to talk into that?
It would help.
Okay, well, so the Solidarity Economy Network works primarily with organizations of practitioners, I guess you could call it. So practitioners of the solidarity economy. So just as a for instance, on our board, there's Community Development, the Credit Union Federation, Worker Cooperative Federation, a Student Cooperative Federation, Highlander Center, sort of movement building, organizer training, popular education, the Center for Popular Economics, which also does economic literacy, popular education. So beyond the board, let me just think of community land trusts, local currency, participatory budgeting, the whole food justice sector. The Rural Coalition is also on the board. So that just gives you an idea of who I mean by practitioner. In addition to practitioners, we also believe that we need to be working with social movements. Justice is on the board, and we've reached out to others. So that's a kind of broad alliance of practitioners and like social movement activists that we're looking to build. I think I'll leave it at that.
The Committees of Correspondence for Democracy and Socialism gets every word of those up there: pluralists, socialists, anti-capitalists, so on. And I think across the country, we took all of our chapters together. We work with everybody except maybe finance capital, but every sector of the population. But my particular little piece of it, I work in Western Pennsylvania, and I work mainly among two constituencies. I'm a member of Steelworker Associates, which is the retirees arm of the United Steelworkers Union. And so I work with a lot of retired steelworkers and other low to moderate income white workers in some of the semi-rural areas of Western Pennsylvania. I also work with very poor African-American communities that live in that same area, but they're pocketed in the cities along the rivers. So those are the two main constituencies that I work with.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm in the League of Revolutionaries for a New America, and the name really explains who we are. We're a group of revolutionaries from around the country. that also works in just about every constituency that the country has to offer, but we mainly concentrate, and I, in particular, mainly concentrate in low-income, working-class communities. You know, working class meaning the whole spectrum of the working class, people of color, white workers, the whole spectrum of the working class, and it's in various fronts of struggle. Like we have a lot of people in healthcare, a lot of people in the whole question, the trade union movement, and jobs, and the whole big question of the anti-poverty movement. So we're everywhere. So.
So that was a little bit of scene setting about, you know, sort of a quick analysis of what the moment is. And we thought after every question we would pause for a little bit of discussion, you know, in the spirit of roundtable, and, you know, just questions, comments, dialogue, whatever. Does anybody have anything on this front, sort of comments about, thoughts about the moment? That, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, if you call something, you can't call something a crisis if it goes on for 20 or 30 years. You know, that's just the way things are. It's not a crisis. And the other thing is that I'm commenting on Maliha's points. And the other thing is, I think capitalism is doing fine right now. People are not doing fine. But, you know, the profits are, you know, the amount of money in the corporations and the banks and the financial sector is all, you know, all the indicators are doing very, very well. It's just people are getting, the living standard in the United States and most other advanced countries is getting
Okay. Whether or not a crisis can last 20 or 30 years. I mean, I think that there's some disagreement. You could say theoretically also, and in practice about that. A lot of people can talk about a long period of stagnation, and that is different than a long period of steadily, let's say, increasing rates of growth, which some people identify as having happened in the U.S. We haven't. I understand that we have had periods of rising growth even since 1982, 1979, 1978, when I might identify certain kinds of disturbing trends as beginning. For me, I think about 1979, 1978 as the period when American workers' wages started dropping and have not stopped. That is a kind of crisis, because the 20 or 30 years before that, they were not in that position. So we can, maybe you feel like crisis is something that happens in one moment and then it's over. Oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that with the microphone. But you know, there's also a long tradition on the left of speaking about this period of deindustrialization as a crisis. I understand a crisis for workers, and maybe not definitely a crisis for certain sectors of capitalism. But I'm sure others have something to say about that.
Anybody else? Take a crack. Anybody else in particular? And also the audience is perfectly, you know.
Well, the speaker said that there was a variety of characteristics that everybody agreed on, but there was one disagreement that was of some interest, and maybe you said it and I missed it.
I did. What I mentioned as the area of disagreement was whether or not capitalism can recover from this, and I think that our question also spoke to that. That, you know, like if you look at people who are making more than $500,000, $250,000 a year, yeah, you know, they're not suffering in the same way that people who are making $8,000 a year are suffering, right? So there's a disproportionality, I think, that you were definitely speaking to. Right?
So, go ahead.
I made the argument that
Yes.
I thought it was possible for capitalism to recover from the current crisis. And to me, the recovery meant a new expansion and the creation of real wealth. not fictitious wealth on Wall Street, but real wealth. And I thought the possibility of it existed in the vast amounts of investment that would have to be made in the creation of a clean energy and green manufacturing sector in the domestic political economy. And that if capitalism did in fact redirect funds that were currently used for speculative gambling into that sector, it would create new wealth in a way that would enable it to recover and put people to work. Maybe not full employment, but certainly better than now. But the question was, and here's, I says, theoretically I think it's possible, but practically what that means is that you have to thwart and defeat the military oil industrial complex.
Right.
And so practically it may not happen. But theoretically, I think it will be possible for capitalists to get out of it. But whether they're smart enough for a majority of them to get the political will in order to do it is an open question.
And I made the argument that it wasn't possible to recover in the main. I was one of the people who made that argument. And I don't think there's any evidence that says that these decisions are made, whether to invest in speculative capitalism or productive capitalism, that these are decisions made on whether or not people think it'd be good for capitalism if we do it this way or do it that way. I think they're made on where maximum profits can be made, and they're driven in that direction. And it seems clear to me, if you look at it from the last 20, 25, 30 years, that because, and I don't want to go too long, but because of the way high technology has been developed and introduced into the productive process, meaning that less and less human beings have become part of the productive process, that meant that that whole equation between constant and variable capital has changed, and the amount of value that is actually produced has been less and less over the years. And it has driven the capitalists towards speculative capital so that they could try to make at least more money.
Right.
Based on not make more value, but make more money,
right,
in order to make up for the loss in profits that they've been able to make from productive capital. And I don't think that's a decision that they're going to reverse, because it would mean actually going against the fundamental capitalist nature of the rule being maximum profit. So, and the other thing I want to say about that and why I couldn't recover is because you look at it, 80% of the market, the capitalist market, is people. People have to buy the commodities that are produced. And what we've been looking at in the last few decades is not only the wages of the workers constantly going down, but also the number of workers that are employed constantly going down. So the market is not there for the capitalist economy to recover. Now, the way they're recovering the profit is through speculation. I don't think that that's a recovery of the capitalist system, because the system is more than just the speculative capital that we see making huge profits right now.
It's interesting. We also, let me just, another clarification. I think you also made the point that that capitalism, not the economy, but capitalism can never recover in terms of for the working class.
Right.
Right? So it might, I think we all agree that it's possible that, at least in the short run, capitalism might be able to recover. As you say, capitalism might be able to do just fine with this incredible inequality, with this continuing disenfranchisement of the working class, and for that disenfranchisement to be growing, ever, reaching more and more and more people. And so I think we had agreement on that.
Right.
Now, as to whether in the very long term that is sustainable based on all that speculation, and the other way that with stagnant wages that capitalism is able to make all the profits is debt. So there was this big, that's part of the whole crisis and collapse, right, is the dependency on debt. And that's why people were able to buy things, right? So in the short term, it's sort of been patched together. But in fact, there's a huge amount of financial fragility still out there. Huge fragility still in the housing market, still in credit cards that hasn't even come due yet. So I mean, I kind of believe we're still going to see a double dip recession. We're going to see a second wave. But who has a crystal ball? None of us know exactly. But I think we're all pretty, Carl's probably the most optimistic, but even that is on a theoretical basis, right? And we're all fairly pessimistic that even capitalism in its most rapacious form can survive in the very long run. I think and also the whole environmental aspect, we very much agree that capitalism really is the problem to solving some of or addressing some of those problems. I think we had strong agreement on that.
And I think you can also think about the fact that if some of us can agree that there can be an environmental crisis right now, but that's not a crisis that all of us are experiencing, let's say, in the nature of what Japan is experiencing, but it will be a long-term crisis. So just like that, you can have a long-term environmental crisis, you can have a long-term economic crisis too. That was also.
What do you call ice storms in South Carolina? What the hell is that? That's an environmental crisis.
Ice storms, yes.
Ice storms in South Carolina?
Yeah.
Okay. North Florida, come on.
Right.
L.A. Have ice storm in L.A.
Okay. Got me there.
Other comments?
But I think that what's happening with the so-called, what is that? What's that word you're using? The restoration or the recovery. Recovery. I think all it is a bunch of rich people trying to up their place in the richest 500. I think that they're just playing with each other's money, trying to outsmart one another in the stock market. And as far as the military-industrial complex, I think that's where the money is, because that's the big straw into our taxpayers' dollar, and that's where the money is. Well, why would they do that? First of all, they know that they're making people are getting less and less. They know we're pissed off as hell. What are they going to do? Crowd control. They know how to do it. They practice it in Miami. Remember that? Remember the Miami disaster? When we were down there, well, I wasn't, but people were down there and they were, trying these little magic technological crowd controls on people. Well, I mean, that's where they're building up their businesses. I'll bet you, I don't know, but I am extremely suspicious that that's where the money is going, and that was my question. Where's the money going now? I mean, some of it's going technological crowd control, but where else? Where is the money going?
Finance. The financial sector is sucking up a huge amount. And it's just grown exponentially as a share of the economy. It's huge.
Who's sucking the tax dollars?
Yeah.
All the corporations and banks are cash rich at the moment.
Yeah. They're all sucked into our money.
They're gambling with it amongst each other. They gamble with our money. When I talk to workers about the situation around where I live, they're very familiar with the racetrack about 10 miles down the road from me.
The what? The racetrack?
The racetrack. I said, the racetrack creates no real wealth. It goes down there. You guys go in and gamble. It's a machine for taking part of your money away from you. A few people come out winners, but the one winner that you're guaranteed to see every week is the house.
Right.
The track takes its cut.
Right.
It's a way of skimming your wealth and then using, people gambling with other people's house. If you understand the racetrack and why the house always wins, as you understand Wall Street.
Well, the racetrack takes its cut and your cut.
Right. Takes it off the top.
There's a question over there, or a comment.
Well, capitalism is going to exist unless there's something that replaces it. I'm much less interested in how well they're doing, but I'm talking about what possibly could replace it.
That's where we're moving.
That's
Any
where
last
we're moving to.
any last comments on this? Then we can move on to the next, which is Jerome's. What is that?
And my question is, how do we do the work we do? And I really approached this from several different directions. One was I approached it from the whole question of leading from the initial question of whether or not capitalism can reform itself, and if you take the position that it can't, then how do you do your organizing work? Versus if you think it can, and then how you do your organizing work. I think that if there's going to be revolution in the United States, which is a very huge and diverse country, then we have to make an approach of a mass base building, mass education process. That people have to understand that not only is capitalism dying, but we have to develop some commonality of a vision of what we're fighting for as well. And that all, I think, takes really deep and broad educational processes to get people out of the whole notion that capitalism has been here forever and it's going to be here forever. You know, it hadn't been here forever, and it's definitely not going to be here forever. But that's what we're taught, and that's the confines of our education. So I think that our organizing efforts will have to be mass. They will have to be based in real political and economic education. They'll have to have some broad elements of leadership development, because if we're going to build a broad mass movement in this country to achieve fundamental social change, then we also have to develop leaders to make sure, because there's a battle out there. You know, a movement is going to develop, but there'll be a battle over what direction that movement should go in. You know, you'll have the battle of people trying to make it go toward reforming capitalism. You know, you'll have a battle of people that want to make it toward some kind of dictatorship, some kind of fascist regime in this country to control all of the various elements. And then there's a battle to make sure that it moves toward revolution. And so in order to be prepared for that battle, we have to develop ourselves, each and every one of us, into some kind of leaders that have some understanding of how the world is developing. And I think that leadership primarily has to come from the section of society which is the most adversely affected by capitalism itself. And why do I say that? Because we have the least to lose. There, you know, the ties that different sections have with capitalism makes them have pause as to whether or not we want to make sure this thing ends. Whereas people who are at the bottom that have virtually few ties to capitalism, and those ties are being broken every day, have really the least to lose and the most to gain to be a part of and lead this process to overthrow capitalism. So I think it should be those elements. And then on the other side that I was thinking of it from is this whole question of, is it reform or is it revolution that we're educating people for and mobilizing and organizing people for? And you know, I think those are two cases, but I think there's a third case, and that is that the long-range goal is revolution, but the fight, the everyday fight, is within the reformed fights that are going on throughout this country. The fight for jobs, the fight for health care. Those are the fights that are on the ground and are the fights that people are really struggling to achieve. And I think we have to fight within those fights and utilize the mobilization around those fights to implement the other necessary things of education and leadership development and those things. I don't think it's a revolution or reform. I think it's the relationship between reform and revolution. Thank you.
On the same question, the big picture way I look at this is a combination. We're basically fighting two different battles at once. One battle I call, and this is not original with me, it comes from Bronsky. One battle we fight is the war of movement. The war of movement is what you saw in Wisconsin for the last few weeks, where you have masses of people in direct action, directly confronting the state power. So that's the war of movement. The other aspect of our struggle at the moment is what's called the war of position. this is where you build organizational and institutional strength for the working class. You build organizations that help the working class to sustain itself, to educate itself, and to encourage it to go further. A good example of a solidarity economy organization that does that is there's 1,600 home health care workers here in the city of New York City in the Bronx who formed a cooperative where they've eliminated the middleman. They've managed to raise the wages and benefits to 1,600 home health care workers. They've built themselves a co-op where they all have a voice in the selecting leadership and a vote. And a share.
Speak up a little bit. The air conditioning is kind of.
What's that?
You speak up a little bit because the air conditioning is.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Kind of loud.
They built themselves a cooperative of home health care workers of 1,600 women, mainly low-income women, and they've managed to improve their conditions, create an organization that helps empower them, gives them some economic strength, gives them some education and some ability to continue the fight. So organizing that is the war of positioning. And in my idea of making a strategic revolutionary change in socialism, we need a combination of both. Right now, we are in a period of strategic defensive, which means the war of position is very important, especially in the local areas, to build these strong points, to conquer and build these strong points in forms of organization. The war of movement is something that takes place at this point tactically. We can storm the Winter Palace in Madison occasionally, but at this point we do not have the strength to take it to its end. We do not have dual power in the streets and a position to say all power to the Soviets or anything like that. But we still wage the battle tactically because it helps raise consciousness and create a much wider context for carrying on the other kinds of organizing that we do. So that's my basic overview on that particular issue.
So I feel like when people talk about their approach to social change, I feel greedy. Like I feel like, yeah, I want it all. I want electoral reform. I want grassroots change. I want reform and revolution. Why can't we just fight on all of these different fronts, right? So I feel like if someone were to ask me to choose between those, that feels unfair. That feels like, why do I need to choose? That's crazy. We need to fight on all of those fronts. That's obvious to me. In terms of the work that I do concretely, I feel like a lot of it is involved around political and economic education, economic literacy, and this is something that I fell in love with doing when I started just doing the Summer Institutes at the Center for Popular Economics. That moment when people, and this happened in our research project that we did in Asbury Park, right? So we're talking to these people who are they're doing lots of important, great work in their communities, and then there's this kind of light bulb moment where you start to talk about them, about their economic activities, even if they don't necessarily think about them or articulate them or sort of write them down in specific kinds of ways. Like there was this woman that we interviewed, and she ran a bicycle collective. So it's a very interesting program where kids put in 15 hours of labor and they get a bicycle. So in the meantime, the 15 hours of labor working on other bicycles, they're all refurbished, and they get a bicycle, and then the kids end up hanging out there, and then they end up teaching other kids, and it's turned into this really interesting community project. And it's turned really big too. This is in Asbury Park. It's called Second Life for Bikes. And then we start talking to her, and I said, okay, so how much do you sell in bicycles? And she says, she reports an amount around $25,000. And because they also sell bicycles to people who don't want to put in the 15 hours of labor, right? And then I asked her, well, but how many bicycles do you also give away in the exchange program? And she said, oh, easily 3 times as many as we sell. So I said, well, have you estimated the value of those bicycles? And she said, no, we haven't done that. And I said, but that's going to be 3 times what your sales volume is, right? That's part of your economic activity that should be accounted for. And then she started thinking, if I started counting that, maybe when I went for grant applications or stuff like that to support some of our education activities, so there's some really concrete effects of seeing yourself as an economic subject, as operating in the economy. And so that's also, I feel like, a lot of what we're doing in Asbury Park. We're talking to groups like this, groups that are interested in also starting new projects. So these groups are already functioning, and we're trying to talk to them and get them to think about what kind of economy they operate in, what kind of economy they might want to connect to. So all of them, we created a solidarity economy map in Asbury Park, and it was an interesting project, right, where all these community members go out and interview their own community members and try to figure out what is the economy like in Asbury Park. That's a process of sort of political organization as well, because now, I mean, there are these great clips of where our guys, all of the Haitian guys who are enrolled in that carpentry class, were the ones who were doing the interviews, right? And so they're joking about, they're doing the interview, and they say to the woman, hey, I know I'm asking you about the economy, because she's saying, oh, I never thought about that, and then he says, hey, I didn't even know what the economy was until 2 weeks ago. This was a pretty alien kind of language to him, and now he's out there talking about it with people and asking them about their economic activities and explaining to them what the economy is like and what different conceptions of the economy might do, and that was pretty interesting. And I think I'm just about time. So I feel also like some of the work that I do is with a lot of scholars too. So that's a whole other strain of my work, and we're trying to, and this is also something that we're working on with Emily and some other folks. We're trying to figure out how to replicate this kind of a project on perhaps a citywide scale too. New York City, and we're in talks of thinking about that kind of project in maybe Philly, and and of course scaling it up too. So we have, it feels like, an agenda for what we want. I feel like what I'm doing right now is in this community in Asbury Park, but we have aspirations, and even those guys have aspirations. In 5 years' time, other people will be coming to Asbury Park and talking to them and asking them about their research project. And you know what, guys, that was really important for us. How do we learn from you, and how do we do the same thing? So we want to think about this in a 5-year, 10-year kind of range too, and replicating this kind of conversation in many different communities. That's our revolutionary goal. But I'm gonna hand it off.
Okay. So solidarity economy, and again, just to underscore, this is in the U.S. and the approach is different in different places. We would agree, I think, very much with Maliha that there are many important facets to this struggle for transformation, social change. They're all important, and we choose to focus on one particular area in the main. Because we believe that there needs to be a balance. So there's a lot of mobilization around resistance, around workers' rights, around policy change, around electoral politics. There's a lot. There is not a very strong movement at all for building that economy that we want to see, right? An economy for people and planet. There are a lot of really great initiatives. There's a lot of really great practices. There's a lot to build on, really a lot to build on. But there is no movement that pulls together really the most transformative practices and policies and institutions in this country and tries to hold it together in a kind of systemic way. So that's really what we're focused on. So we're really more about connecting with the practices that many people would consider alternative economic practices, like the co-ops, like the community-supported agriculture, like the the complementary currency, like the commons movement, very interesting kind of movement about rethinking private property ownership, and what we all should, what our rights should be as having common decision making, as well as to commonly benefit from cultural commons, from natural commons, etc. Very interesting. So those are the kind of economic alternatives that we connect with, but at the same time, we don't want to say that we're just these kind of alternatives. I mean, there are certainly some keepers that we should keep an eye on, right? So public education, Social Security, regulations on, food safety or labor laws or whatever, right? There's a lot of things that would be considered mainstream that we should, we can have debates about how they need to be reformed, but they are things that we should think about appropriating for our economy, right? And then the third area that I want to point to, I think that Maliha alluded to, is a lot of the economy that's just downright invisible, right? There's a lot of stuff that people do that has real economic value that is not monetized, like care work, right? So raising children, taking care of sick people, taking care of elderly people, the things you do for your neighbor, the volunteer work that you do for the PTA or your town, or your volunteer work for a community organization, right? There's an incredible amount of wealth there that we should recognize as being a really important and legitimate part of our economy. So both those practices and those institutions and policies are what we want to try to bring into articulation as a system, that we have a lot to build on already. It's not like we have to start from scratch. So that's part of it, just that connection. Part of the project is also about education and making that visible. So one of the concrete projects that we're working on is what we call solidarity economy mapping and economic integration. So one, it's putting those, particularly the practices, right, on the map, so that if you want to buy from a co-op, or you want to buy real fair trade, or whatever, you want to find a CSA, you can find it on the map. That's one for the consumers, and also for the producers to be able to connect to each other and start really building that economy. So building the supply chains, right? And so this co-op buys from that co-op and is financed by some kind of local currency, that kind of thing. One last thing. I think I'm going to jump over to the reform versus revolution. I think that we would be in sync with, yes, the long-term goal really is revolution. It's radical transformation of capitalism. But what's the reality on the ground? Yes, it is the reform. It's the struggles where they are. But I would add one thing onto that, which is that if you are not also talking about the long term, if you don't have your eyes on that long term transformative goal, then it's kind of self-defeating. So if all you're looking for are better wages, and that seems like the end, it's counterproductive. So the other term to throw in the mix is prefigurative. So to think about reforms as a prefiguration of the transformation, so that long-term revolutionary perspective. So with that, I think we'll open it up. We have about 15 or 20 minutes for discussion.
And then, then we'll go on to another question, and then another series of discussion.
Right, because Carol has another opening.
Right. Yeah.
So any comments? You want to throw their 2 cents in? Yeah.
Well, flipping a little bit back toward, this question of what is the moment. I mean, when I was running that through my head, I thought, well, it's the people. A lot of people are waking up and saying, we've been fucked. I think there's a realization, where there had been maybe a long-term, whatever, malaise. Now suddenly people see it. One area in which people perhaps have actually been aware of it for even longer than now is health care and health insurance. I mean, their doing well is simply to have got insurance at all, and it really, really then constricts what you can do next in your life because you don't dare lose it. And if you're shut out, you're in big trouble most of the time. This is an area where the economic need, you might say, for health insurance seems to intersect with possibilities not so much in the start building it small sector, because you can't do health insurance small. You have to go big. And so this is where it really gets into government and what could government do. Personally, I think if we had a single payer system, it would unleash an enormous amount of economic experimentation that people just don't dare engage in while they're clinging to their jobs in the big institutions that cover them. I guess at the moment, the point of hope seems to be the state of Vermont, which looks like it might actually institute a state single-payer system. But I guess that was a comment, but it sort of has a question to it.
Couple of things. I just happened to sit in on a healthcare panel yesterday in which there were a couple of people from Vermont present. And I mean, they cautioned and said that, you know, a lot of people are looking at Vermont and saying we might be the hope, but in fact, even if the air law passes, it won't be a single payer at all. You know, they still have the ability to purchase insurance in the insurance market from other sources and pay from other sources. So it's not going to be a single payer. It will. I mean, most people in the panel thought that it would be an advance, you know, a big advance. And most people, even though knew it wasn't going to be a pure single payer, was in support of it anyway. You know, and there were some people there from positions for a national health plan, which was not for it at all because it didn't go far enough. But anyway,
I think things have moved in Vermont then.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what happens. What happens is that they had to compromise with some of the businesses that opposed it. But that's just an aside point. But I think healthcare is one of those questions that you know that Emily just sort of emphasized. You know, you gotta keep your eye on the long term. You know, because it's a lot. You know, you gotta think that here we have an industrialized world where most of the industrialized nations have some form of universal health care, you know, and here the United States sits here without it. So on the one hand, you think it's possible to have it within capitalism because other capitalist countries have it. But why is it that the United States is so totally resistant to it? You know, and I'm not sure whether we can achieve single-payer universal health care within capitalism in the United States. And I raise that because I think it goes to this other issue of the state of things. I mean, I think that the healthcare industry is so deeply involved in speculative capitalism that it sort of prevents them from moving away from it. The insurance companies, which is the entity that would be eliminated from the process if we had a single payer system, is so integrated within all the various capitalist entities in this country that they're fighting to the death for it. So it might be that capitalism has advanced so far in the United States because of its integration and all that it's not possible for it to happen here without a fundamental change in the economic system itself.
Other comments? Anybody who hasn't spoken yet?
So, I'm not sure if this is the right place to sort of ask this question, and I've sort of been thinking it, but it's come up in other panels. It's like, okay, we're going to get rid of the capitalist economy. So can we talk about a national economy that would have these principles of, you know, collective ownership and distribution based on need? And I'm wondering if people have been thinking about that. You know, I mean, are there folk within solidarity economy networks that are thinking about that transition? And it's just really a very open question, because I find that that's really actually become a block, okay, to people buying into the vision. They actually believe we aren't able to do it, okay, which, like, I scratch my head and say, you know, and I know the person, like, But aside from that, I think that there's this thing of, like, what would it look like in sort of a macro sense?
Right.
And who's thinking on that?
You want to take the first crack at that? Well, so I would say we certainly don't have all the answers, and it would be actually against the kind of spirit of the solidarity economy to think that we could. But at the same time, it's good to try to think about the possibilities. So the first thing that I would say, well, actually, let me throw in another thing. I think there are places in other parts of the world that are much closer to having to grapple with those kind of issues. So Brazil is probably the best case, where they actually have a ministry of the solidarity economy, and they have an entire civil society network that's in every single state in the whole entire country of Brazil, and they have local solidarity economy forums in every state. So, I mean, they really have, and a whole sort of policy platform, national policy platform supporting solidarity economy. So they're really at the forefront, and they're much closer to having to grapple with how do we really run this on a macro level. So in the United States, it's just such an embryonic level. I think we're still a little bit more saying, let's look at trying to scale up some of the practices that we have. So Cleveland, the evergreen model, is a good example of where, you know, let's think about some really fairly, you know, cutting edge, fairly large startups of worker cooperatives, and what are the kind of supports and connections and collaborations with the big institutions, with the city, with the federal government. I mean, they've cobbled together an amazing network of support, financially, technical assistance, policy-wise, right? So it's a little microcosm to learn from. Maybe Chicago's another good example. Austin Polytech, and you know, that whole Chicago Renaissance. Before I pass it on over, so how do you get from there to the macro? I mean, I think I don't know that we need a magic bullet, but to say, look, if we can build off these very interesting local examples, then the question is, what kind of macro policies do we need to support that? What kind of tax restructuring of the taxes do we need to support these good practices? If we can, I mean, part of it is doing the research to say, solidarity economy initiatives have produced more jobs, more stable jobs. They've created more wealth in the community in more marginalized areas. They're employing hard to employ population. Like half the employees in the evergreen cooperatives are formerly incarcerated. So if we can point to those and say these are successful, we need policies that support those. I think that's the way we need to go, rather than coming in from the top. Mm-hmm. And so in Canada, in Quebec, that's the way that they've gone more. They've built on the ground, and then they've demanded the policies to support them. So maybe Carl can talk about Chicago a little bit.
Actually, I wanted to reply a little more directly to your question. The one book out that does what you talk about, that starts with the solidarity economy and goes through a socialist big picture, is David Schweikert's After Capitalism, where he takes the experience of the solidarity economy and underground and raises it to the level of a general theory of socialism. It might not be one that some people agree with, but it is a a successor system theory, as he calls it. Based on that, my organization adopted a thing I wrote, called, which you can find online by Googling my name, and 11 talking points. It's 11 talking points on 21st century socialism, which tries to integrate socialist economy and the bigger picture of what socialism is. And more practically, I discuss it in terms of, more concretely, I should say, I also discuss it in terms of the lessons of Mondragon in a piece you can find by, called Mondragon and Socialism, which you can also find online. From the other end, when can we talk about the practical examples?
Yes, so that's what's next.
Yeah.
So we're going to transition over there. If we can,
Maybe hold the question until after this,
might
until the
come
next
out in
set
the
of
next one.
questions.
Okay.
Oh, you can make it fit. Come
Just
on.
a quick, just a quickie.
You can make it fit in the next one.
Oh,
Well, right now,
no, you're asking her to wait?
Yeah, wait until the next one. Make it fit.
Capitalism creates consumers and discourages citizenship. Huh? I mean, I think we can agree on that, yeah?
Mhm.
So, and we're talking about organizing people who are taught this from a young age. They rent for themselves, cash, money. They don't value wealth. They don't even know what wealth is. Cash. Cash, they know what cash is. We have to teach them wealth, okay? That's one thing that we have to develop more of community.
Okay, I
To
think
reestablish this.
we can try to
That's
take that up in the
basically
next.
it. And then a couple other things, but
Okay,
miscellaneous.
I think we can come back to that in the next. So we have, one last segment here that Carl's going to kick off.
Practical examples. I work with, in a situation where...
You might want to speak up. I think the people in the back.
Okay. I work in a situation where we've gone from being the most blue-collar industrial employed sector county in the whole United States to being one that's been devastated. I used to have the largest steel mill in the world in my backyard, 8,000 workers on a shift. Now I have the largest brown field with weeds going to grow there. So we have big problems. And the steelworkers, which was a powerhouse and still is in that area, have come up with a solution that leads to certain practical examples and certain interesting questions. They have recognized the idea that they are not going to bring back all the old mills, that there's no way that they can compete with South Korea, China, and other places building and making basic steel. They can compete in some basic, on some boutique steels and some other things. And so the steelworkers have survived by diversifying. They've now organized the rubber workers into the steelworkers, other metalworking, young engineers and high-tech workers, webmasters and stuff like that have been organized into the steelworkers union. So it's still a rather large union, but it's much more diverse. We only have one plant nearby that's still making steel, about 900 workers in it. So we're a fraction of our former selves in that category. One thing the steelworkers did in our area is that they made a deal with the governor of Pennsylvania and a Spanish outfit called Gamesa to make wind turbines. Wind turbines, which wind turbines that generate electricity. And so we have 3 Gamesa plants in Pennsylvania, helped by that 3-in-1 combination of government, this high road capitalist firm, and the steelworkers. Part of the deal was that the steelworkers would be unopposed as to whether the workers could organize a union. So they're 100% union, steelworkers union. It's about 1,000 workers altogether. So this is a major step forward. Gamesa is an interesting firm. It's Spanish. That's what my main argument against it. Why couldn't they do it with an American firm? Which is an interesting question in itself. But the same guy who represents Gamesa also represents Mondragon in the U.S., and that's how the steelworkers made a connection. And they said, well, we need to do more things like this. He said, well, why don't you think about Mondragon? So the steelworkers made deal with Mondragon, that they would try to find them to do some interesting experiments. The idea is to create plants that produce the machinery of clean energy and high-tech green technology, which is going to be needed if we are going to get to a sustainable environment and economy. But to produce these as worker-owned cooperatives, instead of having a private-owned firm like Gamesa own the factory, why not have the steelworkers own the factory? The reason they're doing this is out of desperation, because the government is not doing a damn thing on their own initiative to create these jobs. So they figure, well, maybe they can marshal the forces to try to create these jobs themselves. At this point, I think, the steelworkers are moving very cautiously, and they have not made much progress yet. They're looking around for the perfect firm so that they can take over rather than starting new startups. And they're, studying the question. Part of the reason is because they've been burned badly in the past with what are called ESOPs, employee stock ownership plans, which are not the same thing as worker co-ops, very, very different animal. So they have to be very careful, and they want to make sure the first half dozen or so of these that they start that are successful. So that's one project I work on. I do a lot of educational work on Mondragon. I'm trying to explain what these are, looking for opportunities, businesses for the steelworkers to take over and turn into worker-owned co-ops. That's one thing. The other sector of the population I work with, which is the very low income, the people who need it most. Here's where the question of the solidarity economy intersects with the green economy. And here what we're trying to do is to create green jobs collaboratives among the low income, high unemployed poor, to be able to put kids who have never had regular employment of any kind and have very few skills, have been forced out of high school, how to put them to work at a living wage, and to find a career ladder so they can enhance their skills, and in the process help them take the joint work that they're doing together in winterizing homes, installing solar arrays and so on, to form these into cooperatives so that they have something at the end they own collectively that gives them a strong point, sort of like the home health care workers here in the Bronx that I mentioned to you before, but would be in the area of winterizing homes and installing solar arrays and things like that. There are many other examples, but my time's run out, but I can go into them later on if people are interested.
Without ever talking about whether it was socialism or whatever it was, people would line these components up. A lot of them would get rid of capital. A lot of them would get rid of money. They would transform the whole prison industrial complex to, some kind of justice system that brought into effect the whole community and all that. But people would align a more cooperative society without ever talking about what that society was called. And so I just think that, and we did that with all different sections of society. I mean, the lower income sections of society were the most radical in their transformation, but middle sections of society, middle income sections of society was pretty radical in their organization of the priorities as well. And I think that example really, really points to the need for expanding our understanding of how capitalism works and what exactly will people construct if they had the opportunity to construct it themselves.
Okay, so I feel like I have two very different areas where I'm trying to achieve very different kinds of aims. Well, I have my day job as a professor, so but I see that as my day job, kind of. So I do spend a lot of course, time with students and talking about economics and economic literacy, and I try to bring up these issues too. But I teach in a liberal arts college, so there's certain ways that confines our conversation. But I'm also working a lot with the community in Asbury Park. Like I said, now it's turned into, although it started out perhaps at the cooperative would be composed also of the Haitian teenagers and the undocumented immigrants. It's primarily the undocumented immigrants at this point, and we're going to have to figure out a way to get some of the guys to work on a part-time basis, because the teenagers I don't think are in a position right now to want to work full-time in the worker cooperative. But I was talking with Emily, like we're really engaged in nitty-gritty details right now of cooperative formation. So, you know, it's kind of like, it doesn't sound very perhaps sexy to sometimes some people, but you know, a cooperative is a group of workers trying to figure out and understand and grapple with worker control of the work process. Workers taking control over the profit and the surplus that they produce. Workers trying to figure out how to manage that profit and surplus. What are the things that they have to do to keep that business alive? So it's a sort of instantiation of economic democracy. That's how I see it, right? So we're really kind of, I feel lucky too to work with these guys. I mean, there's all kinds of antagonisms and struggles that come up too, but I feel like I'm learning a whole lot. Just this week I'm sort of branching into corporate law, which I never figured out that that's something that I would be interested in at all. But now suddenly that certain questions are kind of confronting us, I'm trying to figure out, well, what are the options that our guys should be discussing and negotiating, right? And then I have another kind of strain of research and activism, and this revolves around groups and networks in Pakistan and Afghanistan, and especially on the border. And there's work there, some work that I do with this place called the Afghan Research and Evaluation Unit, and trying to kind of intervene and interrupt certain policies and policy discourses about refugees and migration in the region. So it's a sort of policy-oriented thing that we're trying to do there.
So there was a request for a one-line definition of the solidarity economy. So let me try. I think this is from our brochure. It's a new framework of economic development to create an economy for people and planet, grounded in principles of the five that I named: solidarity, sustainability, participatory democracy, equity in all dimensions, and pluralism. Is that okay? All right, so concretely, I think I already touched on a lot of the concrete stuff, especially the forms or the practices that we're looking to support. So I won't go over that again. But so what that whole piece of work, one piece of it is education, right? Just what education. Some of it is kind of the critique of capitalism, because you have to understand capitalism, you have to understand that critique to understand how to do something different, and to be committed to doing something different. So that's part of it, but then the other is to do education around what is possible and what is already in place, what can we build on. So that whole educational process about the critique and solidarity economy as a vision, as a framework to pull together a pretty wide diversity of practices and different visions as well. And so one thing that I want to mention, Carl talked about David Schweikert as one perspective, one particular, maybe blueprint is a little too constrictive, but it is one particular model. Solidarity economy, I just want to be really clear, would not say this is our model. Absolutely not. We would say this is one possibility. That's great. Let's. We had at the first social forum we had a debate with Schweikert and Michael Albert, who's they have this participatory economy model, and we feel that both could fit under solidarity economy. One, for instance, completely rejects markets, and the other one says we should use them. One completely has this anyway. So there are differences. There are very fundamental differences. We're not picking and choosing. Within our definition of solidarity economy, both would fit. And I think we need to not be afraid of having that engagement and those debates about why markets or why not markets, why this, why nationalization or why not nationalization. If not nationalization, then how? What's coordination? All that debate is really important. Really, really important. There's a lot of rich theory and discussion and debate that needs to happen. So education is a big thing. The connecting of the different practices, the different actors, and trying to get us working towards a common vision so that we're kind of pulling in the same direction instead of a million different directions. Another thing that we do is connect the U.S. with the international solidarity economy movement. So we're on the board of RIPESS, R-I-P-E-S-S. So that translates from French and Spanish into the Intercontinental Network for the Promotion of the Social Solidarity Economy. I know it's a mouthful, but it's basically the Intercontinental Solidarity Economy Network. So I'll just talk about one piece that we're participating in as part of that global initiative, which I mentioned already, the mapping and economic integration is something that RIPESS has focused on, as something that all the continents would try to promote. So in the U.S., we're working to find the resources. We've put together a team. Maliha is part of the team to do the mapping, to figure out for instance, what are the boundaries of the solidarity economy? Walmart does fair trade now. Are they in? Are they out? On what grounds are they in? Are they out? There are lots. That's a kind of obvious one, but there are others that are very sticky, and it's a good conversation, and it's a necessary conversation. So that whole mapping thing is both to put it on a map, to make it visible, to connect in a really concrete way. The producers create supply chains, and also to gather some data, so that eventually we can start making the case to policymakers that the solidarity economy is really an important part of the economy that really supports people and planet, and it deserves support on a state level as well. So with that, we have 10 minutes or so, 10, maybe 15 minutes to open it up. And let's just remind ourselves that there was she left, right? But the question about
still there, so she must be
about that we're all kind of groomed to be consumers as opposed to be citizens. So let's let that hang there. If anybody wants to speak to that, go ahead.
Maliha, you talked about being in the process of forming a worker cooperative in Asbury Park, but somehow I missed what it is that this cooperative plans to either produce or do, and I guess I could add, so what is the first question, and then why just that?
Sorry, I should have mentioned that. So it's a construction workers cooperative, and they're all skilled carpenters, varying degrees of skill. Some of them are considered master carpenters, and that's a big thing in construction, right? There's a gradation, and we're also coming against construction is a difficult sector to organize in. There have been a couple of different kinds of groups that have put together construction cooperatives in the New York area, and in some ways I feel like I was talking to my friend about this yesterday, and the worker cooperatives, at least in New York, have taken off and done really well in certain kinds of service sector occupations. Cleaning, house painting, childcare. I can point to very strong examples, and not so much in construction, and not so much in manufacturing in New York City either. So that's one of the things that we're seeing, and I don't think this is just about New York, but we're having a difficult time with some of the more capital-intensive sectors and occupations. And that's why also the evergreen model is important to think about, because that is a capital-intensive kind of model, but it also requires a lot more resources, right? And it requires a lot more pulling in of the community. So we're facing we're in a tough spot because of that, I feel like. So in terms of your question of why just that, that's not it at all. I mean, we're interested in, and I am definitely interested in, the expansion of this particular kind of model for its class kinds of constitution in many different areas and many different occupations. The New York City network, for example, is in all of the service sectors and branching into restaurants and, like I mentioned already, childcare, cleaning, healthcare. So we do have a long-term goal. We have identified 3 or 4 different areas where we could see worker co-ops growing up in the city in Asbury Park. But you need, first of all, there's just a couple of us that are working with this worker cooperative, and so we don't have an institution yet that will support us, support our work, support us to hire full-time organizers, because it's not easy to just start up a group like this, and you need somebody who will be really integral in the formation and helping people learn how to do the work of governing themselves.
Other questions, comments? Does anybody want to take a crack at the sort of consumer citizenship? Don, go ahead.
I wanted to ask Carl if you've gotten anywhere with the green jobs collaboratives among the low income. Have any of those actually formed, or?
Not where I had. We haven't been able to get access to resources. We haven't been able to build the unity among the different components of it yet. So everything's still in the discussion stage. Part of the problem is a lot of the green jobs money got cut off at the knees and underfunded. And so the usual suspects line up with the trough. And once you get money allocated at the top, it gets down allocated to the state, it gets down allocated to the county, and at the county level, some of the first green jobs money got spent building a new ramp on the expressway in Pittsburgh. It has nothing to do with green jobs. I kept a bunch of construction guys at work because it's a question of who has the power. That's why we need to win these wars of position. So we need some organization so that we can have some clout when it comes to who gets what.
Well,
without those, you're just
the evergreen might be a good example, though, of some green jobs. So are you familiar?
Yes, that's an opposite example where they started with a number of foundations, particularly the Cleveland Foundation, who had been funding job training programs for years in a poor section of Cleveland. And they would train people, and people would come in, they would get to take their job training programs, they would get their certificate, and they would go back out on the street, and there would be no jobs. And after doing this over and over and over, finally they got fed up. So they got a board together, and they went off to the underground, learned the lesson, came back, and said, okay, let's stop the job training programs and create businesses that will put people to work. And in their case, they used the foundation and $1 million grant from the city government to start up capital. They used the local Cleveland universities and community colleges as their sources of innovation and training. And then they worked with community organizations to find high-employed sectors. And they created an industrial strength laundry. They got together with major medical centers in the city to be the customers of it. They created a very actually innovative one. I think is really innovative. It's Ohio Cooperative Solar, which basically takes a lot of young people with construction worker skills, and what they do is they rent rooftops of downtown buildings, and they install solar arrays on them. They own the solar arrays. The solar arrays then produce electricity, which they give the building owner a cut of, and they sell the rest to the grid, and they make money that way. And during the off season, when they can't be installing these things, when the weather's too bad, they winterize homes. So they keep people employed 9 to 12 months out of the year that way. So that's a very interesting model. Basically, they are in the ownership of small miniature power plants business that are cooperatively held by the workers who put them together. So it's a very interesting model that can be easily replicated any place there are rooftops and sunshine. It's just about everywhere.
The co-op is Ohio Solar.
Ohio
Cooperative, but they're all these businesses, the laundry, the solar, and the greenhouse. There's a hydroponic greenhouse the size of a football field. It's all part of Evergreen Cooperative. So it's a network, much like a business group, much like Mondragon.
Right, and they have 12 more on the drawing board, so it's not just stopping with those 3. So the idea is to build these network of businesses to grow a community, an alternative community economic development plan that's worker-owned and controlled. And so that's a very positive example.
So we're just about out of time. Let's take one more.
All these things are new to me, exciting, but I also wonder, is there part of these projects where people bring up the idea that this isn't going to be enough? Because in a capitalist system, capitalists are going to war on these things. They want these things destroyed, and they're always going to be really small. Because I think looking at history, a lot of times people thought, these cooperatives are going to become the new thing, and it never has happened. Something quite different.
So the
evolution comes.
The answer to your question is that one, yes, people always raise broader questions, because once you give workers control over something, you become the master of your factory. The next question is, well, why can't I become the master of my town? If I can become master of my town, why not the county? If you run the county, why not the state, and so on, all the way up? It opens up radical questions. So that's number one. Number two, they are not limited to small scale. That is the kind of cooperatives Mondragon, for instance, represents in Spain. I was thinking of making a paper, writing a movie. Mondragon, not your hippie food co-op.
Right.
We are talking multi-billion euro scale, a huge conglomerate that manufactures everything under the sun. That's the cutting edge of the most advanced productive forces and the most advanced management techniques in the world that are being accomplished there. It's still a relatively small scale. We're only talking about 100,000 workers, but the model is not limited by that, and it can work, and probably will grow in very interesting ways. I think Raul Castro right now is taking a very hard look at it. He has one Mondragon co-op in Cuba working on biotech, but he has 500,000 workers that he's laying off, and he's encouraging to form co-ops. So I guarantee you that that's one of the things that they're looking at.
Just a comment, please.
Can I just tag on to that and your statement that capital is going to strike back? Maybe not. I mean, there hasn't been an attack on Mondragon. There isn't we're building on the Cleveland model in Springfield, in Western Mass. We have all the major institutions on board. They don't care that we're talking co-ops. They don't care if we're talking, job creation in their poor neighborhoods surrounding these institutions. They're all for it. They don't understand what a co-op is. Some of them never heard of it before. They don't really care. It's not an ideological. It is for us, but it's not for them, right? So it's interesting that something like Mondragon can fly under the radar. I'm not saying it might happen that it really does come under attack, but there is a possibility of building within the shell of the old, and maybe not attracting that attack until maybe more the 11th hour, when we really do need to think about seizing other avenues of commerce. Okay, quick
brief comment. What we're talking, a lot of this we're talking about is I put under the language of horizontalism, where people who are affected or who are in need of X or Y or Z get together on X and do X without government, and Y, etc. and Z. Yeah, The other aspect is, I think we should be encouraging horizontalism, as you are, but I think we should also take back government under the maybe under the cry of economic justice. We are paying the taxes; they are not. They're running things. It's our government. In other words, take back our government under the cry of we pay the taxes. It's our taxes. It's our government. We own the government. We're paying for it. Give it to us. Give us. Don't give to them.
What's the first three words of the Constitution and the last three words of the Bill of Rights?
Yeah, we the people.
And the people themselves.
Yes. And the people themselves.
Makes a nice picture.
Good job.
I would say, I think we do have some people in Solidarity Economy that do reject the state, right? So the anarchists end, and we're not shutting them out, right? But you know, there's a range, and I would say most people see a role for the government.
You're
welcome to come up and talk to us, but I think we might need to end.
Right.
Yeah. So thank you very much, everybody. Thanks.
Wonderful.